All right, let's dive in. We're going to try and make sense of one of the most complicated geopolitical stories out there today, the 100-year struggle of the Kurdish people for their identity, their land, and really their survival. And it all kicks off with one absolutely staggering number: 40 million. Just let that sink in for a second. That's how many Kurdish people there are, give or take. We're talking more than the entire population of Canada or Australia. But here's the kicker. The reason that number is so mind-blowing: it represents the single largest nation on the entire planet without a country of their own. So that leads to the big question, right? The one we're here to unpack. How on earth did 40 million people, a group with their own language, their own culture, a homeland they've lived in for centuries, how did they end up as prisoners of geography, literally scattered across the borders of other nations? Okay, so to get to the bottom of this, we've got to start with the basics. Who are the Kurds? Well, they're an ancient people, an ethno-linguistic group with a homeland called Kurdistan, a rugged, mountainous region right in the heart of the Middle East. Now, here's the thing. You won't find Kurdistan on any official map today. Why? Because after the Ottoman Empire fell apart, their homeland was literally carved up, sliced and diced, and absorbed into the borders of 4 modern countries: Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And this division, this partition drawn up by foreign powers, that is the absolute root of this entire century-long conflict. The story of how this happened is it's a gut punch. It's a classic tale of a promise made and then a promise spectacularly, devastatingly broken. And it all goes back to the absolute diplomatic chaos that followed World War I. So check this out. It starts in 1916 with the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement, where Britain and France were already behind closed doors, drawing new lines all over the map. Then, in 1920, something incredible happens. The Treaty of Sèvres officially promises the Kurds their own independent state. I mean, for a second there, it looked like the dream was actually happening. But then, just 3 years later, the Treaty of Lausanne comes along and completely wipes that promise off the table. Gone. I mean, look at the difference between these two treaties. It's night and day. Sèvres, it had articles, a whole section, laying out the path to a Kurdish state. Lausanne, it didn't just ignore the promise, it pretended the Kurds didn't even exist. Not a single mention. What happened? Well, the Allied powers decided that the stability of the new Turkish Republic was more important than the rights of the Kurdish people. And just like that, with the stroke of a pen, the fate of millions was sealed. And that single decision, that betrayal, it created this impossible situation. 4 separate regions, 4 separate fights, but all part of the exact same struggle. For the last 100 years, the entire Kurdish experience has been defined by which side of an artificial border they just happened to be born on. And this division created this totally fractured reality. You've got Bakur in Turkey, home to the largest Kurdish population, where they faced decades of armed conflict and cultural suppression. Then there's Bashur in Iraq, where they've actually achieved something close to statehood, a formal autonomous Kurdistan regional government. In Syria's Rojava, they literally built a revolutionary self-governing region out of the ashes of a civil war. And then in Iran's Rojava, they're up against this relentless systemic repression. So you see, 4 regions, 1 people, but 4 totally different fights for survival. And you have to understand, this fight wasn't just about land. It was a fight for their very identity. These new states pushed policies of forced assimilation. In Turkey, they were literally called Mountain Turks, and their language was outlawed. In Syria, a census in 1962 stripped over 100,000 Kurds of their citizenship, just overnight. Imagine that. Suddenly you're stateless in the only home you've ever known. But this battle for identity often escalated into something far, far darker. As one of our sources puts it, the story involves systematic attempts at physical annihilation. Let's be blunt about what that means. Genocide. 182,000. That's the estimate for the number of Kurdish civilians who were killed or just disappeared during Saddam Hussein's Anfal campaign in Iraq back in 1988. This wasn't an accident of war. It was a deliberate, state-run campaign to solve the Kurdish problem for good. And part of that campaign was the horrific attack on the city of Halabja. 5,000 people, mostly women and children, murdered in a single afternoon when the Iraqi regime dropped chemical weapons right on top of their homes. And this isn't ancient history. The horror has continued into our own time. More than 10,000 Yazidi Kurds were massacred by ISIS in 2014.
It was a clear campaign of genocide that also saw thousands upon thousands of women and girls forced into sexual slavery.
So, after all of that, after facing that kind of history, what's the end goal? What do the Kurds actually want today? Well, the answer has gotten a lot more complicated. It's shifted from a simple demand for a country to this really profound debate about the very nature of power and government. Basically, two competing visions have emerged. On one side, you have the traditional dream, a sovereign, independent Kurdistan with its own borders and government, kind of like what the KRG in Iraq pushed for. But on the other side, there's this radical new idea called democratic confederalism. This one seeks autonomy without creating a new state. It's the idea they've been putting into practice in Rojava, in Syria. So what exactly is democratic confederalism? Well, it's a political philosophy developed by the imprisoned PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan. The core idea is that the whole nation-state model is inherently oppressive, so instead it calls for a bottom-up system of self-governance through local councils, with these deep commitments to things like gender equality and ecology. It's really about empowering society, not just drawing new lines on a map. And this wasn't just some theory in a book. In the autonomous region of Rojava, they actually did it. They built a pluralistic system that included Arabs, Syrians, and others. They put in place a co-chair system where every single leadership role has to be shared by one man and one woman. And they built their own self-defense forces, including the now famous all-female YPJ, to protect this whole experiment. But, and this is a huge but, this story is so far from over. In fact, the incredible gains we've just been talking about are now facing their greatest threat ever. This is the unfinished chapter, and it's being written as we speak.